Summer 1943. Across the endless fields of Kursk, the earth and the sky shook under the roar of steel. More than 6,000 tanks from both sides clashed, tearing the ground apart, blasting dust and fire into the air. Day and night became one in a sea of blood, smoke, and explosions. This was the largest tank battle in the history of mankind. And it was the irreversible turning point when Nazi Germany lost the initiative for the last time and began its relentless slide into defeat. In the summer of 1943, the Eastern Front was bracing for a decisive confrontation, the Battle of Kursk. After the catastrophic defeat at Stalingrad earlier that year, Adolf Hitler was desperate to regain the strategic initiative. He believed that a massive assault on the Kursk salient, a bulge in the Soviet defensive line, could change the course of the war. The plan, codenamed Operation Citadel, was drawn up by the German High Command. The goal was to strike the Kursk bulge from both the north and south, encircling and annihilating Soviet forces concentrated there. If successful, Hitler hoped this would shatter Soviet resistance and force them back onto the defensive once again. The Kursk salient stretched about 550 kilometers across and 150 kilometers deep, between Oryol in the north and Belgorod in the south. Seeing the chance to trap a major Soviet force, Hitler committed nearly all his remaining strength. Around 900,000 troops, 2,700 tanks, 10,000 artillery pieces, and 2,000 aircraft. He concentrated up to 70% of all German tanks and 65% of the Luftwaffe on the Eastern Front for this single battle. New weapons such as the Tiger Y, Panther tanks, and Ferdinand, Elephant, tank destroyers were introduced, with hopes of overwhelming the Soviet T-34s. Hitler demanded victory at all costs, declaring that Kursk would be a warning to the entire world of Nazi Germany's might. But the Soviets had already uncovered the plan. After their triumph at Stalingrad, Soviet intelligence, aided by Allied reports, provided Moscow with clear insight into German intentions at Kursk. On July 2, 1943, Joseph Stalin ordered the Red Army to prepare for the coming offensive. Under Marshals Georgy Zhukov and Alexander Vasilevsky, the Soviets constructed an unprecedented defensive system in depth. 5 successive defensive lines stretching 250 to 300 kilometers, packed with trenches, anti-tank ditches, minefields, and fortified strongpoints. More than 20,000 guns were positioned, including 6,000 anti-tank cannons and hundreds of Katyusha rocket launchers along the likely German breakthrough routes. In the skies, thousands of Soviet aircraft were deployed, most notably the IL-2 Sturmovik ground attack planes, nicknamed flying tanks, ready to strike at German armor from above. Engineers also planted over 500,000 anti-tank mines and about 440,000 anti-personnel mines across the approaches. Altogether, the Soviets massed over 1.3 million troops, more than 3,400 tanks and self-propelled guns, 19,000 artillery pieces and mortars, and about 2,200 combat aircraft in the region. Their determination was clear. Kursk would be turned into a death trap, grinding down the German forces before unleashing a decisive counteroffensive. After multiple delays while waiting for favorable conditions and the arrival of new weapons, Hitler finally fixed the start date of the Kursk offensive for early July 1943. On the night of July 4th into the early hours of July 5th, the Germans launched Operation Citadel. At first, their infantry units carried out probing assaults along the front line to clear the way for the armored spearheads behind. Around 10:30 p.m. on July 4th, in the southern sector of the Kursk salient, German troops quietly seized several key heights, turning them into artillery observation posts. Yet the Soviets were already on full alert. At about 2 a.m. on July 5th, realizing that the enemy was massing for a general offensive, the Voronezh and Central Fronts unleashed a massive preemptive bombardment. Thousands of guns and Katyusha rocket launchers opened fire at once, pouring a storm of shells onto the German assembly areas. This sudden Soviet strike threw the German attack formations into confusion, delaying the advance of army groups south and center by 2 to 3 hours, easing the pressure on the Soviet defenses. At 4:30 a.m. on July 5th, the Battle of Kursk officially erupted. German artillery roared to life, blasting Soviet positions on both the northern and southern flanks of the salient. Immediately afterward, the armored spearheads of the Wehrmacht surged forward. In the south, hundreds of tanks, including Tigers and Panthers, formed wedge-shaped assault groups and hurled themselves at the Soviet lines. Behind them, mechanized infantry and self-propelled guns followed closely, attempting to break through and split the defense in depth. Brutal tank and infantry battles flared up across a front stretching for dozens of kilometers. On the very first day, the Germans tried 4 times to rupture the Soviet lines, but the layered defenses, reinforced by dense minefields, made progress excruciatingly difficult. German engineers struggled to clear safe passages through the mines under relentless Soviet artillery and mortar fire. Many tanks that did enter the cleared lanes hit hidden mines or were struck by well-placed Soviet anti-tank fire, bursting into flames in the open steppe. Smoke and dust blanketed the battlefield, the earth itself shaking under the thunder of thousands of guns and bombs. In the northern sector, the scene was no less ferocious. Field Marshal Günther von Kluge committed the German Ninth Army under General Walter Model and the 2nd Panzer Army to strike southward, aiming for the towns of Poniri and Olkovatka along the Oryol-Kursk axis. This was the junction between the Central Front under Rokossovsky and the Voronezh Front under Vatutin. The Germans hoped to punch through here and encircle the Soviet 13th Army, repeating the kind of encirclement victories they had achieved in 1941. But by 1943, the Red Army was a very different force, battle-hardened, disciplined, and thoroughly prepared. The German thrusts quickly ran into fierce counterattacks from Soviet reserves. At Poniri, soon nicknamed the Little Stalingrad, of the Kursk Front, Soviet infantry regiments and tank brigades dug in stubbornly against the German armored spearheads. Many strong points fought to the last man. One striking example was Captain Igasev's anti-tank gun company north of Poniri, which held out until its final shell, destroying 19 German tanks and armored vehicles before being wiped out. In savage close-quarter fighting inside the town, tanks blasted each other at point-blank range. Some, crippled with broken tracks, continued firing until destroyed. The small town shook under the inferno its ruins, echoing with explosions, gunfire, and screams, while blackened hulks of German and Soviet tanks lay scattered among shattered fortifications. On the southern flank of the Kursk salient, the Germans under Field Marshal Erich von Manstein at first gained faster momentum. Along the Belgorod-Kursk axis, Army Group South, consisting of the 4th Panzer Army under General Hermann Hoth and Army Detachment Kempf, threw its full strength toward the town of Prokhorovka. This was a vital position, about 87 kilometers southeast of Kursk, guarding the gateway into the Soviet rear. For a full week, from July 5th to 11th, the fighting was relentless. Despite pouring in maximum effort, the Germans managed to advance no more than 35 kilometers at the southern spearhead. Tens of thousands of soldiers from both sides fell for every patch of contested ground. The skies became a battlefield as well, with thousands of aircraft locked in duels for air supremacy. In the early days, the Luftwaffe, using Stuka dive bombers and FW-190 fighters, provided close support to German armor, inflicting heavy losses on the Soviets. Only by July 10th to 11th, when the Red Air Force committed reserves and began regaining part of the air advantage, was the German advance effectively slowed. Still, Manstein resolved to deliver one final steel blow, betting on a concentrated thrust at Prokhorovka, where the elite armored forces of both sides were converging. On July 12, 1943, just outside Prokhorovka, the largest tank battle in history erupted. At dawn, the 4th Panzer Army launched its strongest assault force, the 2nd SS Panzer Corps, with 3 elite divisions, Leibstandarte, Das Reich, and Totenkopf. This was meant to be the decisive strike to smash the Soviet defenses. At the same time, Marshal Ivan Konev's steppe front rushed in the 5th Guards Tank Army under General Pavel Rotmistrov, designated as the Soviet Mobile Counterstrike Force. At 8:30 a.m., Rotmistrov ordered over 500 tanks, mostly medium T-34s, with some light T-70s to charge into the flank of the advancing German army. Within minutes, around 1,500 tanks from both sides were locked in combat across a battlefield no larger than a few dozen square kilometers. According to Rotmistrov's account, within minutes of advancing and firing, the echelon formations of the 18th and 29th Guards Tank Corps had pierced into the German lines. Taken by surprise, the German Tigers and Panthers lost their long-range advantage and were drawn into chaotic, close-range brawls with swarms of T-34s. The fields erupted in smoke and fire, the ground trembling under the barrage of shells. Tanks clashed in confusion, blasting away at ranges so close that many never had the chance to turn their turrets before being destroyed. The Tiger's 88mm gun could obliterate a T-34 from hundreds of meters away, but in this swirling melee, many Tigers fell prey to the smaller, more agile Soviet tanks striking from the flanks. Some machines, crippled with broken tracks, stood immobile in the fields, yet kept firing until their hulls were hit and burst into towering flames. Amid the chaos of Prokhorovka, acts of heroism emerged. The crew of Captain Alexander Skripkin from the 181st Tank Brigade, 18th Corps, charged straight into the enemy formation, destroying 2 Tiger tanks before their T-34 was struck by heavy German fire and set ablaze. Skripkin, wounded, was pulled from the burning tank by his comrades. As they retreated, a Tiger fired after them. In a desperate moment, 2 Soviet crewmen, Sergeant Nikolaev and Gunner Chernov, climbed back into the flaming T-34 and drove it directly into the side of the pursuing Tiger. A tremendous explosion ripped through both machines, their sacrifice taking the German tank down with them. On the German side, resistance was equally fierce. Tank gunner Wilhelm Roos recalled how a T-34 suddenly burst into their formation. His commander shouted to fire, and the Soviet tank only came to a halt when it was barely 8 meters away, a gaping hole torn into its turret by an armor-piercing shell. Roos admitted that the Soviet armor had completely overwhelmed the exhausted German troops after days of relentless combat. By the end of July 12th, the German thrust at Prokhorovka had been halted. Unable to advance further, they dug in defensively on the ground they had already seized. The battle ended with devastating losses on both sides. Some 300 to 400 German tanks destroyed, while the Soviets lost as many as 500 tanks and self-propelled guns. Yet, strategically, the Soviets had achieved their goal, stopping the most dangerous German offensive spearhead. The road to Kursk was closed to the Wehrmacht forever. In the aftermath of Prokhorovka, the German High Command grew deeply concerned. At the same time as the tank clash, news arrived that the Western Allies had landed in Sicily on July 10th, threatening Germany's southern flank. Faced with this new crisis, Hitler personally ordered the termination of Operation Citadel before it could achieve anything of significance. On July 16, 1943, the surviving German armored forces at Kursk were ordered to withdraw to their original positions. In reality, after more than a week of savage fighting, the German offensive at Kursk had collapsed in failure. The battlefield was littered with tens of thousands of German dead, alongside hundreds of charred tanks, guns, and aircraft. In just the offensive phase from July 5th to 16th, German losses exceeded 50,000 men and between 400 to 700 tanks and self-propelled guns. Kursk marked the last time in World War II that the German army would have the strength to launch a large-scale strategic offensive on the Eastern Front. From that moment on, the initiative permanently belonged to the Red Army. As soon as they realized the enemy was beginning to falter, the Red Army seized the opportunity to counterattack. In fact, starting on July 12, 1943, while many German units had not yet withdrawn, the entire Eastern Front shifted into the phase of strategic counteroffensive. In the north, the Western and Bryansk fronts under Generals Sokolovsky and Popov launched Operation Kutuzov, striking directly at the Oryol salient, the stronghold held by the Germans above Kursk. The German forces at Oryol, already weakened after days of battle, were forced to fall back and defend desperately. On the very first day, the Soviets broke through the outer defenses, opening the way for their main forces to pour in. After nearly 3 weeks of relentless fighting, on August 5, 1943, the Red Army liberated Oryol, wiping out the German salient there and continuing the advance. By mid-August, Soviet spearheads had pushed 150 kilometers deep, reaching the outskirts of Bryansk, destroying or shattering 15 German divisions along the way. Meanwhile, in the south, the Voronezh and Steppe fronts under Generals Nikolai Vatutin and Ivan Konev launched the Belgorod-Kharkov offensive, a direct continuation of the Battle of Kursk, with the goal of liberating eastern Ukraine. From August 3rd to 23rd, 1943, fierce battles raged around Belgorod and Kharkov. The Germans had fortified themselves within a defensive belt nearly 90 kilometers deep, with trenches, bunkers, and strong points prepared long in advance. Yet the overwhelming Soviet assault shattered the German tactical lines on the very first day, forcing them into a fighting retreat. On August 5th, Belgorod was liberated, and by August 23rd, Kharkov, one of the most important industrial centers of Ukraine, had fallen, with the Soviet red flag flying over the devastated city. In just 3 weeks, the Red Army destroyed or broke apart another 15 German divisions at the Kharkov front, drove the enemy 140 kilometers westward, and expanded the offensive front to 300 kilometers. The victory of the Belgorod-Kharkov offensive marked the full conclusion of the Battle of Kursk, which had raged since early July. From that moment onward, the Soviet Union not only crushed the last major German offensive on the Eastern Front, but also decisively seized the initiative, shifting permanently to full-scale counteroffensives, paving the way toward the liberation of its territory and the ultimate defeat of Nazi Germany in the years that followed. The Battle of Kursk in the summer of 1943 entered history as one of the largest, bloodiest, and most decisive clashes of World War II. It was not merely a battle, but a colossal showdown between the two greatest war machines of the era. Nearly 3 million soldiers, over 8,000 tanks, and 5,000 aircraft from both sides were thrown into the inferno record-breaking numbers never before seen in human history. Over more than 7 weeks of combat, the cost was staggering. The Soviet Union suffered about 860,000 casualties, with over 1,500 tanks and thousands of guns and aircraft destroyed or damaged. The Germans, too, were bled dry. Around 500,000 officers and soldiers were killed, wounded, or missing. 1,500 tanks, 3,000 artillery pieces, and nearly 3,700 aircraft were lost. 30 German divisions, including 7 elite panzer divisions, were wiped out or crippled beyond combat effectiveness. Kursk, following Stalingrad, delivered a mortal blow to Nazi Germany's expansionist ambitions. After this defeat, Hitler's high command permanently lost the ability to mount large-scale offensives on the Eastern Front. From then on, the Wehrmacht was forced into a defensive posture, reacting passively to the increasingly powerful counterblows of the Red Army. For the Soviet Union, however, Kursk marked a strategic turning point. The Red Army seized the initiative, never relinquished it, and carried it all the way to the raising of the red flag over the Reichstag in Berlin in May 1945. The Battle of Kursk in 1943, with the thunder of thousands of tanks and the blazing fields lit by fire and steel, became an epic of tragedy and heroism etched into human memory. It closed forever the last German hope of victory in the East and opened the road toward the ultimate triumph of the nations fighting fascism, a victory bought with blood, with tears, and with the limitless sacrifice of millions. Kursk stands as a historic milestone, the moment when the tide of war turned, carrying the world step by step toward final victory in the most brutal conflict of the 20th century.